All right. Welcome to today's office hours. My name is Mark Stepp. We're going to be going over a topic that we've gone over kind of before, but I wanted to take a little bit different look at it in a couple different ways. We're going to be talking about the building blocks of workflow activities. And a building block itself is, I grew up with Legos. I was an only child, so I just spent a lot of time with Legos. So I really like the configurability of Legos and the ability to create things with lots of little pieces. And that's really what we're going to kind of talk about, is those building blocks that help you create things in a much bigger, better way. So we're going to go through that. For those that don't know me, my name is Mark Stepp. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer here at Realvolve, creator of the workflow platform and the relationship scoring, and have been doing this for 33 years as far as real estate technology and helping real estate agents deal with automation and creating a sustainable business. I am co-author on a book called Our Best Workflow Secrets, and we just kind of dive deep into things that will help automate your business and making you perform in a much more efficient and effective way. I spent a lot of time talking about the why. Why do we do certain things? Helping you understand the why will really give you the ability to dive deeper into anything that we do. So the agenda today, we're going to talk about really the 8 different types of activity building blocks, or the calendar workflow building blocks. We're going to talk about those. There's 8 of them. Pretty much anything that you do, we can go through these tasks, scheduled appointments, pre-appointments, and we're going to go through all those. I will talk about some recent updates that we've been going through, some of the challenges that we've had, unfortunately, but also some of the changes and fixes that we've gone through. We're going to talk about that, and we'll just have a general Q&A at the end as well. Do not be afraid to ask questions in the middle. If something doesn't make sense, unmute yourself or put something in chat. I don't always see it in chat, but I try to monitor that. And if you aren't getting my attention through chat, certainly unmute yourself and say something. We do these office hours pretty much every week, Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Without too much fail, other than last week we did have a internet technical difficulty, so we didn't have it. But you can always go back to previous office hours by going to realvolve.com/office hours. And just to show that real quick, whenever you go to office hours, it's really just a link to our YouTube channel. So you can certainly watch it on YouTube. Go to YouTube and you can see all the different things that's on there. Certainly subscribe and like those. Would appreciate it. But then you can come in here and click on the little hamburger, and you can see all the playlist for office hours. And there's tons and tons of training elements in here that would be very beneficial for anybody. The last one we did on March 13th, I had a special guest who we went through, how do you print workflows, and some integration software that's available that will let you print workflows. But there's lots of different types of topics and stuff that you can go through and see. So even if we don't have an office hours, and there's enough of these pre-recorded ones that you can certainly go back to. Just because they are past doesn't mean they're not good. They all have great content, learning moments, and things about the software that will be very beneficial in teaching you the things that you need to know about Realvolve. So we'll be going through that. So let's go ahead and dive into the workflow activities and the building blocks that make those up. There's really 8 of them that I've identified. There's probably a few more, depending on how you want to look at them. There's 2 of them that are that's the majority of what it is. And then the rest of them are kind of subcategories of things. So, if you were to take all of these and kind of combine them, condense them, they really kind of group into the first two. But if you start thinking about and you start figuring out how you're using these different types of activities and figuring out that they can be used in a particular method that's going to benefit you one way or another. So let's go through the first 8, or go through these 8 as brief descriptions, and then I'm going to go into how do you actually set them up. So the first one is a task. You've got task and you got scheduled appointments. Those are the two majority ones. A task really is simply an activity that may or may not have a date in it. So sometimes you've got activities that are just honeydew things where you need to get it done, but it doesn't really matter when it gets done, unless you're my wife and you want certain things done certain times. But in the work scene of things that you need to do, excuse me, there are things that you don't necessarily have to have done on a specific day. A lot of times they are, most of the time they are, but some things you don't. But even if they're on a certain day, you may not need a specific time that it gets done. So those are what we consider tasks. On the flip side of that, you've got scheduled appointments and to-dos. And you might think to-do and task is the same thing, but in a way, they're actually different. A to-do is definitely, it's got a time, and typically it has some kind of date associated with it. Now, it has a date on it. It has sometimes will have an associated time with it. Now, the time could be a specific time, like 8 a.m., 10 p.m., whatever. You've got certain things that you have to do at certain times. Some things may just be all day activities. So, birthday's an all day activity of some sort. And it's a reminder. I need to make a phone call. Doesn't matter what time I make that phone call, not necessarily, just, whatever. So, those are the two majority of the tasks that build up workflows. And the following, the next 6 of them are really just variants of those two. So knowing those two is important. Either you've got date and time, and sometimes the time is associated with all day. Those are appointments and to-dos, or it doesn't have a time associated with it and potentially doesn't have a date with it. And that would be a task. It's just something to get marked off. The benefit there being, it needs to be done, but there's just no specific time, versus being on time on a particular activity. So now let's dive into what a variant might look like. You've got activities that are appointments. I've got to go to this listing appointment. And that's the scheduled piece right here. What if you want to do reminders prior to the appointment? And we call these pre-appointment reminders. There's nothing that much different other than the fact that you're specifying it, saying, I want to be notified X number of days before some scheduled appointment. The appointment itself is there, but I need something in addition to that appointment to give me some reminder of this. And it's a pre-appointment reminder. I'm going to go do something. I need to get some things ready prior to a meeting, and I want to make sure that those get done. Just making sure that there's no surprises, and making sure that activities get done, or whatever. You might have an appointment that your listing appointment or your closing appointment, and you've got to get certain things done. That's what those deal with. Now, there's not that much difference between a pre-appointment reminder and a deadline reminder. A deadline reminder They're pretty much the same thing. It's just how you think about them in your mind. Where a pre-appointment is, I've got to get something done for um, this appointment. A deadline reminder might be more like, hey, I need to send notification out 5 days prior to an expiration date. We got some kind of deadline or whatever for something that is important, and we want to give time for it. Very small difference between those two. You might even say they're the same, but in your mind, if you think about them differently, whenever you're building your workflows, it's like, oh, I've got this deadline. Oh, I probably ought to put a reminder on that X number of days before. I've got this appointment that I need to. I want to give 1 day prep time for it. So I'm going to create a separate activity just as a reminder for that. The advantage with workflows doing this and setting these up is if that appointment changes, if that deadline does change, your expiration changes or whatever, any appointment or any activity that you've got set up that's based off of that calculation will get rescheduled whenever the activity gets rescheduled. So it's always going to be X number of days before that appointment or whatever. It doesn't stay on that the day that it's previously assigned. So if it moves forward or if it moves back, either way, it will adjust any kind of pre-appointment reminders or deadline reminders for you automatically, which is great. You want to be able to keep everything on task and on time. The next 4 items are, again, they're variants of an activity, but they're important to know. The pre-reminder things are things that happen before some activity. In a delayed activity, it's something that happens after a specific milestone date. So a lot of people will say, 2 days after I have my appointment, my photography appointment, I want to do something, or do it X number of days after the listing date, something that has to be done, sending a thank you, whatever. You're doing X number of days after some date. And same type of thing happens with the delayed activities, is that if that date changes, if that appointment changes, if that listing date probably wouldn't change, but the date in the MLS, the closing date, any of those types of things that you may have on your calendar, if they change, any activities based off of that particular milestone date will change as well. So if it's 1 day after, 2 days after, 3 days after, whatever, if the date changes, it'll still be 1 day after, 2 days after, 3 days after, whatever you've got it set up. So that's a delayed activity. Now, you can also have what we call conditional delays. And a conditional delay is very similar, where it's something that happens on an activity, but it's based off of the completion of another activity. And we're going to go through all of these, how we set all these up. But think about this in your mind. If you have some activity or some task, something that has to get done, you've specified that it needs to get done, especially a task that maybe you've got it on a certain day, but you can fudge with it. It doesn't have as much of an importance, but you can fudge with it as far as maybe do it the next day. But you always want another activity to be done X number of days after the completion of that activity. So even if it's scheduled for, say, the 27th today, but I don't complete it until tomorrow, if I have a conditional delay activity that says 1 day after the completion of this activity, it would be 1 day after I complete that activity. We'll go over how to set that up. Completed activity notifications. Now, this is something more for like team leaders might set this up where you have an activity in your workflow process where maybe an assistant is doing something, and as soon as that activity is done, just like the conditional delay, but in this case, it's not a delay, but it's based off the completion of some activity. And maybe as a team leader, you want to be notified when some process gets completed. Your assistant does the, or team member does the task, and then as part of that activity, it sends you a completion process saying, hey, this certain thing got done, whatever. So we'll go over that as well. And then kind of the last thing, as far as building blocks of the 8 that's really important, is the responsible party notification. Now, inevitably, you're going to have people that need to do things for you, and they may not be Realvolve users. They may be Realvolve users, but they don't go in and use it regularly. So instead of relying them on seeing the calendar, the things that need to get done on their calendar, maybe you're notifying them that a certain thing needs to get done. So you're actually sending them a text message or an email message saying, hey, this certain thing needs to get done. You're notifying the responsible party. That's all it is. That just is very beneficial whenever you've got somebody that, again, is not necessarily a Realvolve user. They don't log into your system, but they still need to be notified when something needs to get done. That maybe is not an appointment. It may just be one of your vendors or something like that, and you need to let them know that certain thing has to get done. So those are the main 8: the tasks, the scheduled appointments, the pre-appointment reminders, the deadline reminders, the delayed activities, conditional delayed, completed activity notification, and responsible party. If you can understand those 8 items, you can create virtually any workflow to do anything that you really want it to do. The question now becomes, how do you set those up? And so that's what we're going to go into and really get into the how-tos, the crux of setting these up. Now, the majority of what we're doing whenever you go into your workflow area, so if I'm in here in my workflow editor, and it will list, how many appointments there are to do. Let me cancel this one. You may have one item, you may have 100 items, whatever's in here. Each one of these, whenever you come in and you edit them, you're editing the activity itself for that workflow. A majority of what we're going to be spending our time on is how do you set up this schedule piece and some of the other associated pieces that go with it. But the majority of the setup is right here. This little, you just click into the schedule section and you're making some modifications here. So let's go into that. And see how this is done. So whenever we look at the tasks side of it, you're wanting to create some kind of activity that has a date or may not have a date, but it does not have a time. That's the main crux of it. It does not have a time associated with it. There's 2 things that you can do. Number one, if you don't need a date on an activity at all, it's just something, put it in my to-do list. I need to get it done, but there's no due date on it. There's no time. It's just something I need to do, what I call a honey-do list. But it needs to be in there. So you can, whenever you're in that scheduled section, you can specify it as none, meaning don't schedule it at all. I mean, it's going to go into the calendar as a task, but it doesn't really go in as a date or a time item if you select none. If you specify it that it does need a date of some sort, typically it's going to go in and just have a start date. Whenever you start the workflow, that's the date it's assigned. Whenever you're starting that workflow, you do have the ability to change that start date. So it gives you a flexibility of changing the start date. But you'll notice that there's no time associated. The none for the time selection is not there. So as a task, the only thing that you need to decide is whether or not I need it to be on a date or not a date, really is what it comes down to. Now, what happens, this is kind of an example of what happens. You can have an all-day activity that's in the all-day section of your calendar. If you've got the show tasks item checked in your more little button menu here, if you have show tasks, a task being something that doesn't have a time, we go ahead and put those non-timed tasks, as long as it's got a date, into the all-day section. Now, it's showing there, but technically it is different, and I can show you kind of what the difference is there real quick. Actually, let me break out of here and go to the calendar. And here is an all-day activity. So it's something that's marked as an all-day activity, and here is something that is just a date-only task. Okay. In the calendar, they look the same. There's really no difference. But whenever you come in and you I completed it automatically. Whenever you edit this as an all-day activity, whenever you look at the schedule piece, it'll say that's an all-day activity. Okay. If you are dealing with a task and edit it, and you're viewing that, you'll see that it has a due date, just a due date. It's not an all-day activity, but it's a due date. By doing that, one of the things that this does do is whenever we synchronize with Google, Google does have calendar activities, which an all-day item would show up in. Google also has what they call their tasks, and a task that just has a due date but no time will show up in a task list, not the calendar. So slight difference, slight variation, but an important one if depending on how you're wanting to use it. So that's really the only that is really the only thing that you have to worry about tasks, is identifying, does it have a date or not? And if it does have a date, do I want to show it in my all-day section? No biggie. Scheduled appointments, however, we need to be in that scheduled section, and we're doing two things. Number one, we are specifying a milestone date of some sort. Now, it could be start date, but typically if it's an appointment, it's going to be associated to some kind of date field in your database. In this case, this particular activity is for the photography date. So the title on this is, we're going to have a photo, do photos, and it's using some merge fields up here to identify the street address of the property. And it'll merge that in. Whenever it creates this activity, it'll say photos and then 123 South Main Street or whatever. It's the address of the property that this activity is being applied to. In this case, it's saying, okay, 0 days after, which 0 days after is the actual photography date. If we were doing something other than an appointment, you could use the 1 day after, 2 days before, whatever. But pretty much any appointment type thing is always going to use the 0 days after its date field. And then also, most of those date fields also have time fields associated with them. If it's something that you would typically do on a certain time, then you can pick the time. Now, the advantage here is that whenever this activity gets created and it's using this date and time fields, the system knows that, hey, this is the actual appointment activity for this date field. This is, if we're going to be doing something on an appointment, this is it. This is the activity. So what we can do then is, if we change the date, if we change the time in the fields of that activity, or excuse me, in the fields of that property or transaction or contact, in this case for photographies, we're talking about the photography date field in the property, it's going to allow the activity that's generated from this, whenever it actually creates the activity on the calendar, if you change the date or time field in the database, it will change the activity date or time automatically for you. In addition, it will look for any other activities in this workflow that use that date and recalculate those days as well. So it's always going to stay in sync with whatever date you specified. Big advantage there. So anytime you're dealing with schedule appointments, the main key thing here is that you've got the appropriate date and time for whatever date field in the database that you're using. Once you know that, then you can set up the appointment and you're good. Okay. Now then, the pre-appointment reminders. There's no difference between what we just went over as far as this goes and a pre-appointment reminder, other than you not specifying the time. You're still specifying the date field, but you're specifying some information about how far in the future do you want, or in the past do you want to make this known. So if I've got an appointment scheduled for April 1st and I want something 2 days before that, then, which is still a future date, it's just so many days before, that is a pre-appointment reminder. So you're setting yourself up as the main photography date is whatever date, in this case the 25th. 2 days before that is the seller reminder. I want to send a reminder. How do I do that? Well, what we're doing is we're going back into, we're creating a new activity, and we're going to go to that schedule field. And in this case, the difference is that we're specifying 2 days before the photography date. And here we can specify no time, or we can specify all day. It depends on whether you want it as a task in your task list or something on your calendar. So depending on how you're wanting to use that, you'll either say it's an all-day activity or it is a none. You don't specify the time and it puts it in as a task. So the only difference in a pre-appointment reminder versus the actual appointment is that you're specifying the number of days before because it's a reminder, you're doing it before the activity. So it's before the photography date, and specifying that's an all day. The other thing that you need to know for a pre-appointment reminder is who am I going to send it to, right? So the one field, the additional field that we do need to use in our activity, if you're looking here at the activity, we have a with field. If you click into that with field, you can pick who the interested party is. In this case, we want to send the reminder to the seller and the seller too, that they're going to have an appointment for photography coming up. So that's important. The other thing that we need to do is we need to set up an action. What is it that we're actually doing? We're sending a pre-appointment reminder, so there's an action besides just the reminder itself coming up on the calendar. We want it to do something. In this case, we actually want it to send an email or a text or both, and we want to send it automatically. We send the email message, and then we tell it which message that we want to send. And in this case, let me see if I don't have it on here. In this case, it would have just a template that uses some merge fields that says, okay, this is the appointment. This is when your photography date is, the photography time. Have things prepared for photography, and letting them know how to prep for it. And maybe you've included some attachments to that email saying, these are the things that you should do prior to the appointment. So make a phone call, whatever. The things that you put in there is up to you. But knowing that you can set up that pre-appointment reminder is the important thing. Okay, so just like the pre-appointment reminders, you also have the deadline reminders. What's the difference? Well, there's not much difference at all. It's just in how you're thinking. It's a deadline that I've got. Technically, an activity or an appointment is a deadline. So there's really not much difference. These are pretty much the same type of thing, but you're just doing it, 5 days before some kind of deadline date. So pretty much the same thing as the pre-appointment reminders. We set the title. We set 5 days before whatever start date or whatever milestone date we're talking about, and then have some kind of action. Maybe you want to text to confirm or something like that. Was the appraisal okay? Whatever. So these are just deadlines versus appointments. You set them up the exact same way, but it's just a matter of a mindset. How do I think about these things? Now, the delayed activities are pretty much the same, except for instead of using before, we're using the word after. Okay, so if you've got a listing date, one day after that, we want to coordinate photos. All you're doing is doing a delayed activity, delayed after some key date, some milestone date that needs to be done. In this case, do some process X days after the listing date, sending a thank you message so many days after the closing date, whatever it is, it's a delayed activity from some milestone date. That milestone date is, again, probably some kind of date in your database, some kind of the listing date, the photography date, the closing date, any of those dates, but you're just doing something after it, typically an appointment of some sort, but it can be whatever. You can do it with a start date. If I start something, then 2 days after that, the start date in that case is not a date field in the database. It's just a physical date of when I wanted this started. The challenge with it is if I don't base it off of a given date, in this case, a listing date, if I change the listing date, if I change that listing date, the coordinate photos date will change as well. So if I change this to the 16th, it would actually change this to the 17th. If I'm using a start date, you can't change a start date. It will always stay the same. So that's kind of the difference in whether you use a date field or the start date. If you don't care about ever changing it once it's started, start date's fine. How do you set that up? Well, no difference other than you're using the word after instead of before. And here is, so actually this one should have gone in the previous one. The photo shoot request. The photo shoot request in this was maybe the email that got sent, and it has those merge fields I was talking about. So you can say what was the location, what's some directions, the date, the time, any special instructions, and then your signature. So this is the template that probably would have gone with the other one. This one might be coordinate photos so many days after. Actually, this works here as well. So what this is really a request so many days after the listing date, I want to send the photographer, in this case, probably the with field would be the interested party of photographer. And we're going to email the photographer, and we're going to say, this is the shoot request. Actually, yeah, so this is the request. So we're saying, send the photographer a email 1 day after listing requesting that we do a photo shoot on this particular date and time at this location. Okay. You'd have some other activity after you send this to, confirm it. Was the date and time changed? Was there anything else? But this is just a delayed activity after I list to schedule the photography, coordinate it, and I'm sending an email to my normal photographer asking them if they can do it at that scheduled date and time. Pretty simple, but it is a delayed activity, delayed after some other activity. The conditional delay, which is still a delay, but it's conditioned based off of the completion of something. In this case, a similar type of thing where we've got a scheduled photography date, but I want 2 days after the completion of that photography date, I want to send an email or do something to check on the photos. How are they coming? Did I get them? You may do it the next day. You may do it, give them a little time to do some editing and stuff, however you schedule your stuff, but realize that some activity happened in this case, or some appointment happened. In this case, the photography date and time happened. And once I complete that, then I want to give it 2 days to before I actually check on the photos. Now, the reason why we call it conditional delayed is the fact that I'd scheduled it on the 25th and it rained that day. It didn't happen. So we had to reschedule it or do it the next day or the next, whatever, whenever, after I complete that activity. Once I complete that activity, then it gives me 2 days after the completion date, not the date of the activity itself, but after the completion of it. Once I complete it, then it creates the date for the check on photos. So whenever you look at this activity, it'll actually be to be determined. It doesn't know the date of this activity until this one's been completed. So whenever you're looking at your tasks, it'll be way at the bottom because it doesn't necessarily know when that's going to happen. So that's an important distinction. So how do you set that up? On a conditional delay, the only thing that's different is that we're still using the number of days after. So in this case, 2 days after the completion date, we've got a special menu choice called completion date. And it's not a date time field. It's not a start or end date field. It's just called completion date. But you have to specify the completion of what. What am I completing? And this will be a drop down of activities that's in this workflow that you can choose to complete on. So let me just show you that, because it's an important one as well. So let me go back to workflows and let me just grab listing marketing. I don't know. This has got several in there. So here I've got lots and lots of different activities. If I was to go in here, so do I have any completion ones? I do not. I'm just going to grab one. It doesn't matter because I'm not going to change this at all. But here is a 2 days after MLS target date. So if I come in here 2 days after MLS target date, I want to check on the details of the listing online. I want to make sure that it's been done properly. Now, this technically is a delayed activity, but if I wanted it delayed on the completion of something else, instead of MLS target date, I would choose the completion date of something, And then that opens up this section here called choose activity. And then I can pick from any of my, in this case, 30 whatever activities there are. I can choose one of my activities that it has to be completed before this activity is given a date. So once I complete my, let's see, property brochure, then I want to check on the details. That really doesn't make a lot of sense, but you have to specify which activity that it's completing on, not a date. In this case, it's a date field. It's the date that this activity actually gets completed. So once you tie those two together, then it becomes a conditional delayed activity, which is very powerful to be able to say, based off the completion of something, I want to do something else. So you've got some activity, do the photos, and then do I have the photos back? Once I choose my photos as the activity, 2 days after the completion of that is when I'm going to send this. Hoping that makes sense. Go back to slideshow. All right. I think this is number 7, the completed activity notification. So this is not used as much, but it's definitely used, especially by team leaders, team members that need to be notified when something gets done. So you might have the transaction coordinator activity of some sort. They're doing something, and once that activity gets done, you want to notify the team leader of something. In this case, you really don't want a delay of any type. In this case, it's 0 days after the completion, 0 days meaning on the same day of the completion of something. In this case, whatever task it is, I want to send an SMS notification to that team leader. So it just immediately sends that out. How do you send that out? Again, we're going into the scheduled task. We're going to say 0 days after the completion date of whatever task we're checking. Once that activity is complete, I want to do something. I want to send the SMS notification. And the thing that you've got to realize is that whatever you're choosing here, the verified signed documents, it is going to be in your list of activities. If it's not in the list of activities yet, it won't be in your list. So whenever if you were to start this activity as the very first activity in your workflow, which doesn't make sense, it won't have a choice to pick from. You don't have another activity because you can't pick your own. You can't pick itself as the completion. That doesn't make sense either. So it's important to have other activities in your activity list before you actually do this. But once you do it, then select whatever it is activity that you want completed, and it'll do that. The last one, and we're doing great on time here, the responsible party notification. Now, again, this is something where you may have somebody that needs to get something done for you, but either they're not a Realvolve user, they're outside of your organization, or they're a buyer agent or a seller agent, and they don't spend as much time in the software as they should, but you still need to get them notified. And you've got some maybe a listing coordinator, transaction coordinator that's coordinating things for them, but it's something they need to know about. And what you're going to do there is, in the with field, maybe they're the buyer agent, and they need to be notified of something, and you want to send out a message, responsible party notification, whatever that is. Hey, buyer agent, you need to do this. Here's the activity. Here's the date and time. here's the information. So they get an email or they get a text message notifying them that because they're the responsible party, they're the ones that need to know about this, they are getting notified. And that's pretty much it. Of all those things, you can get 99% of all your calendar workflow appointments scheduled, done, set up, so that it will either set it up as an activity, it'll set it up as a reminder prior to that activity, as either a deadline or a pre-appointment reminder. It'll set it up as a delayed activity that comes after the appointment, or the completion delayed activity. Completing notifications. So once an activity does get completed, you're notifying somebody or you're notifying a party member. If you can remember those 8 items and how you might use those, you can be just like I was whenever I was a young kid building. Actually, I still do it. Sorry, guys. I still play with Legos. Whenever you're building things, you can build some very extravagant and well working workflows with each of these different building blocks, piecing them together how you want and making them what you need. And then that shows up in your calendar. So that's it. Any questions about those? I do have one. Where do we find previous webinars from people using Realvolve? Okay, I will cover that here in a second. Wondering if there's any other questions about this.
Hey, Mark, I have a question. I understand that if a task is completed, that other tasks might be dependent upon, like you were using the photography example.
Right.
If I manually change in the property record under the listing tab, the photography date, will the workflow pick up on that?
Yes, and that's an important thing. So if, let me just come in here. So anytime that you've got any activity, like here, MLS target date, MLS target date, MLS target date, these 3, actually, there's other ones here, MLS target date. Any of them that are based off of MLS target date, if I go into my property, my transaction, whatever field, and I physically change that date, then any workflow that's assigned to that property that uses that date will change its allotted appointment as well. So it's all automatic. So if I change, and I was using photography date, in this case here, we've got 0 days after photography date. This is my photography appointment. 3 days after the photography, I'm uploading photos. I'm doing this. There's several things I'm doing. Well, if that photography date changes, then I change it in the property itself, then any appointments that are connected to it that's in my calendar will also change appropriately, because it knows that it's based off of that photography date. Now, anything that's based off of a start date and end date do not have fields in the database. You cannot change those. So if something needed to change here, there's no way of connecting it. But because it's using a field in the database, if you change that database field, it will change it here. Likewise, if I go to this activity right here, because there is a special case here, because it's using the photography date and the photography time, it knows that this activity is the primary appointment for that activity itself, because it's got both date and time assigned. If I go on my calendar and I drag it to a different place, doing a drag drop, then it will change that photography date field in my database. It will also change all of the activities that are associated to it at that same time as well. So everything links up and and ties together. Make sense?
Great, thank you.
Awesome.
Mark, I have a question.
Okay.
If I'm in the middle of a already have a workflow going for say the seller contract to close, and I identify something that's missing in our workflow, would I just do a one-off on the radar and then go back and fix the workflow for future properties or transactions?
So what you can do at that point is you can go into your workflow and add that activity for future ones. Definitely. Anytime that you miss something, you caught, oh man, I really needed this, go ahead and add it back in. But once you do that, then go ahead and go back to that property or transaction or whatever, and you can start that workflow again. The thing is you can unselect everything and just select that one that you just added. And then click next. And then that way it'll add it in kind of as a one-off. Now you could just add it manually if you wanted to, but by doing it this way, if you've set it up in your workflow already, you don't need to go in and add it manually. And if it's based off of a certain time, a certain date field, it links that date field like we were just talking. So if that date field does change, that activity would change. If you just do a one-off and add it to the calendar yourself, it won't be linked to a milestone date at that point, the listing date, the closing date, or whatever. If it was, something you put in that was supposed to be 5 days before listing date or 5 days before closing date, and the closing date does change, but you did it as a one-off outside of a workflow, just manually put it into your calendar, it won't change because it doesn't know that it's connected. But if you do it in the workflow and have it connected to that date field, then it knows, and then it would change it. And even though you've started that workflow twice, it's no big deal. You can have workflows, you can have as many workflows running as you want. And in cases like this, where maybe you had something, maybe you turned it off, maybe some of your activities were based off of them doing a cash deal, and then something turns up where they do need to get a loan or something, and you need to add in something. So you can always come back and restart a workflow. Make sure that you undo the things that have been started, otherwise you'll get duplicates, but you can add them right back in once you run it again. You're just starting it over. That makes sense?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Any other questions?
I do have a question, Mark, unrelated to today's presentation, but I know you folks have been doing a lot of updates, but we discovered this week, or actually the end of last week, that if I go to the dashboard and select all the tasks that are open for people to do, I get a long list, but they don't match. If I look at the particular contact or property or transaction record under the activities, those tasks are not showing under incomplete or complete. Not all of them, but there's a large number that are not matching.
You're going here to the activities?
Yes.
And not seeing
if I open, for example, in a new tab, if you opened the Emily Lane one right there in a new tab, and then go to the activities tab above, I don't find it in the incomplete or completed tab. Or Are they indexed separately?
No, they should be the same.
And this is more than a one-off. We've got several instances of
it. Potentially, and I can check with our engineers. Potentially, we need to go ahead and re-index. They have been going through and making a lot of changes to the calendar. We run, evidently, there's a process that the engineers go through. They run some things to rebuild the indexing, and potentially yours didn't get done, I will make sure that they run it for your account and get back to you.
Okay, I'll send you an email with our account name.
That would be awesome. Mark
Thank you.
at realvolve.com, just to keep
Yep.
me honest. I
Thank
do get in overwhelm at times, so, but I can do this right after this meeting. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so there was a question earlier. Where do we find previous webinars from people using Realvolve? So in that realvolve.com/office hours, if you go to realvolve.com/office hours, it will take you to our stuff, and we've got this entire playlist. Now, again, all of this is a framed version of YouTube. So you can come down here to the YouTube and click on it, and it will take you to that activity, or to the one that is currently in the list. But if you look and just take a look at the Realvolve piece here, you can click on it.
People ask us all the time,
and you can see all the different videos and stuff that we've got. We've got different playlists. So if we come over here to the playlists, we've got free webinar trainings, webhook training, Realvolve office hours. This is the basically all this is a playlist of office hours. But we've got Navigator training. There's lots of things that we've got out here. Go out and you can use the little search if you're looking for a certain topic. There's hundreds and hundreds of videos. We're very proud of all the content that we've got, all the people that we've done webinars with, and it's all available right there for you. Just do a search for Realvolve.
It's Andre. I was specifically looking for the last one that Shay did. I wasn't able to attend it, so I didn't see it, but I don't see the new one. So I don't know if it takes a while to upload them, or if that's why I asked if they were in a different place.
That is a good question. We do have, besides here, we do have, depending on the webinar, I'll have to check on that. There are some other, typically what they'll do is the marketing team will go through and create kind of a special replay page for that. And I think they actually put that on our Wistia account. And so it kind of is a landing page, and you can get more information. Maybe there's documents and stuff that go along with it. But let me...
yeah, if you could check on that, because I don't know where that page is, but that would be good.
Let me check one thing here. That was a great, well, she's always good. Shay is amazing.
She's always good. That's why it doesn't matter. I would like to listen to it because I always catch one thing, if not a ton, and I go, oh gosh, I wish my mind thought that way. But anyway, that's why I like listening to it. So I think those are great. I also know that things are changing, as you guys are well aware, in the market. And I was wondering if you are looking at maybe bringing in like Shay again to kind of go over how agents that are maybe not as savvy as she is or know what to do in order to bring value, and, you know, this not getting paid if you're a buyer's agent and how you navigate that. So there's a lot of changes going on, and a lot of agents do not understand it, but it is the nature of the beast. So I don't know if y'all are into that or not.
Absolutely, we are. Dave and I were talking about that last week. Because of the change, he actually started kind of a conversation piece out on social. You know, what are people doing? and what's going to make the difference. I honestly, I think there is going to be a big weeding out, of people, but I think it really comes down to knowing what your niche is, knowing what your specialty is, and how you, as an agent, market that. Because if you're out there competing with every other agent, it's not that you're not going to get paid. It's just, how do you get paid differently? And that's really what it comes down to, because of the legal issues of what's been going on and how it's been done in the past. It's going to change. We know that. But exactly how, there's a few different options. And it really kind of comes down to, how do you market yourself, and offering those offering those services in a way that other agents are not, that makes you more lucrative, but also more important in the eyes of the buyers. So definitely, I'll pass that on. And but Dave and I were talking about that last week, so we'll see if we can get some special people, including Shay.
Okay, that would be awesome, because I'm putting together information, because there's so much disinformation that it's crazy the amount of noise out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Last thing on my agenda, and we're actually over, we did do some recent updates, some import fixes, some data entry. There was some issues with contact data entry not being fully accessible. There were some limits there. We corrected that. Tag editing, SMS sending, several things that's on this list that we took care of. We've still got more to go, so hang in there. The engineers are working hard to get everything in a working order that's acceptable. So do apologize for the challenges, obviously, but the team is working hard to get everything in line for you. So, all right, guys, if there's anything else that you guys want to learn about, send me an email, mark@realvolve.com. Definitely want to make sure that we're hitting on everything. This is a topic that I've covered before, but it's so important for people to realize that workflows are not magic. There's certain elements that you're just putting together and making something very robust from it, and that's what these building blocks do. And once you realize what you can do with it, you can build virtually anything that you want. So, all right, guys, talk to you later. Thanks for coming. See you next week. Bye.